The Public Speaking Project presents Avoiding Reasoning Fallacies by Lisa Schreiber, Ph.D. Voice talent by Jill Sabarbro, with Morgan Hartranft as the media production specialist. In the second season of the show South Park, in an episode entitled Chef Aid, famed attorney Johnny Cochran's closing argument of the O.J. Simpson trial is satirized. In one scene, the cartoon Cochran uses what has since become known as the Chewbacca defense, a form of the red herring fallacy. In an effort to distract the jury and win a harassment case against Chef, he states, "Why would a Wookiee, an 8-foot-tall Wookiee, want to live on Endor with a bunch of 2-foot-tall Ewoks? That does not make sense. But more important, you have to ask yourself, what does this have to do with this case? Nothing. And so you have to remember, when you're in that jury room deliberating and conjugating the Emancipation Proclamation, does it make sense? No. Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, it does not make sense. If Chewbacca lives on Endor, you must acquit. The defense rests. While this is an obvious example of a reasoning fallacy, sometimes we are influenced by faulty reasoning because it is very subtle and we don't recognize it in arguments. In addition, sometimes we use faulty reasoning in our own arguments, and this makes us much less persuasive. A reasoning fallacy is an argument that is flawed by irrelevant or inadequate evidence, erroneous reasoning, or improper expression. There are many types of reasoning fallacies, and the purpose of this module is to introduce you to the most common types of reasoning fallacies. Understanding fallacies will improve your critical reasoning ability, and it will also improve your ability to persuade listeners in your speeches. In the first category of fallacies, we will look at those fallacies where faulty reasoning is present. The first of such fallacies is called a false analogy. In this fallacy, the speaker compares two things that are not alike in significant respects or that have critical points of difference. Here are two examples. We should not teach socialism in the university any more than we should teach arson. Or, how can you tell your children not to take money from others when the government they live under does it all the time? To successfully identify a false analogy, it is necessary to show the two objects under comparison resemble each other in insignificant ways, while they differ in significant ways. The second fallacy involving faulty reasoning is called a hasty generalization. This fallacy draws a conclusion based on too few or atypical examples. For instance, I owned 2 Chevys and they gave me nothing but trouble. They were always in the shop. Chevys are poorly constructed, and I think they should be avoided. Or, state-owned mental hospitals are a horrible place to send family members. There was just a news story of patient abuse in a hospital in Georgia. This fallacy is evident when counter-evidence suggests the conclusion is unreliable. A false dilemma, also known as an either-or fallacy, forces listeners to choose between two drastically different alternatives when in fact more than 2 alternatives exist. For example, America, love it or leave it. Or, the government must either lower taxes or accept a high unemployment rate. If you can identify more than the 2 options presented, you have spotted this fallacy. The false cause fallacy can take several forms. In one form, the speaker mistakes temporal succession for a causal sequence. In other words, because one event happened before another, the first event is presumed to have caused the second event. The other type of causal fallacy is when one argues that there is only one cause of a complex social problem. Here is what each one of those fallacies sounds like. I spilled the salt at lunchtime, and sure enough, later I got into a car accident. Or, we would not have such a problem with gang violence if we did not have so many babies born out of wedlock. Remember, temporal succession is not sufficient for establishing a causal connection, and complex social problems never have just one cause. In addition to fallacies caused by faulty reasoning, there are some fallacies that are based on appeals to the audience's prejudices and emotions, rather than the substantial issues raised in the argument. The first fallacy in this second category is attacking the person. Here, the speaker launches into an irrelevant attack on the person or the source of the argument. The attack is focused on the person instead of the person's idea, and it is an attempt to divert attention away from the issue. This fallacy can take several forms. One can attack the speaker's background. One can attack the speaker's character. One can attack the speaker by implying a vested interest, or one can attack the speaker for hypocrisy. Here is what this fallacy may sound like. She was educated in a different country, so she is clearly not qualified to be the president of the PTA. Or, he should not receive the management position because he has admitted to being homosexual. Or, you just want me to go to college so you can turn my bedroom into an office. Or, how can she tell me that I should quit smoking when she smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day? To test for this fallacy, you need to separate the speaker's claims about a person from the speaker's claims about an idea. Next is the bandwagon fallacy, a fallacy that most of us have used on our parents. In this fallacy, the speaker appeals to popular opinion as justification for a claim and assumes that if enough people believe something, it must be true. We see this fallacy often in advertisements which claim over 10 million copies sold or 70% of voters favor candidate X. These examples of bandwagon claims may sound familiar. Mom, can I please go to the party? Everyone else will be there. Or, Dr. Swenson's test was extremely unfair. Just ask anyone who took it. Just remember, popular opinion cannot serve as evidence that an idea is right or wrong. Our mother was correct when she asked, well, if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? Another fallacy that appeals to prejudice and emotion is the appeal to misplaced authority. This type of argument appeals to an unqualified, unidentified, or biased source to support a claim. When we see or hear a celebrity endorsing a product, we observe this fallacy in action. The fallacy can also sound like this. This book was endorsed by Oprah, so it must be good. Or, expert nutritionists agree that phenphedrine diet pills are the most powerful weight loss supplements on the market. To determine if this fallacy is in use, ask if the expert is clearly identified and if she or he is qualified, reliable, and objective. The last fallacy in this category is an appeal to tradition. This fallacy occurs when someone claims that we should continue to do things the way we have always done them, simply because we have always done them that way. This argument takes advantage of people's desire to avoid change and assumes that we should not challenge time-honored traditions. For example, this institution of marriage is as old as human history and thus must be considered a sacred union between a man and a woman. Or, we do not need to spend millions of dollars searching for alternatives to oil. We have been using oil for many years and have enough oil in reserve to last for many years to come. Sometimes there are good reasons for changing our ideas or practices. When you listen to arguments, you should keep this in mind. In the last group of fallacies, we will look at arguments that are flawed by irrelevant or inadequate evidence. The first of these fallacies is called begging the question. This fallacy can take 2 forms. In one case, the evidence used to support the claim is simply a restatement of the claim using different words. In the other case, the claim is presented in the form of a question, which makes a questionable assumption, like a trick question. Begging the question may sound like this. Soapy Suds cleans better because it has superior cleaning power. Or, why is Millergate University the best university? Because it is. Or, can you continue to afford to run the risk of having your home accessible to burglars? In each case, the claim needs to be separated from the evidence in order to test the soundness of the argument. At the start of this module, we mentioned the red herring fallacy, in which the speaker seeks to prove a conclusion that is not at issue. It is a diversionary tactic and an attempt to hide the weakness in one's own argument. This may also take the form of making an argument so extreme as to sound ridiculous. Red herrings sound like this. I fail to see why hunting should be considered cruel when it gives tremendous pleasure to many people and employment even more. Or, why should we be concerned about Siberian tigers becoming extinct when there are more and more homeless people who need our support? Or, a mandatory helmet law could never be enforced. You can't issue citations to dead people. If it sounds as if the issue is not being directly or appropriately addressed, you may be listening to a red herring. A non sequitur is an argument that fails to establish a link between the claim and the evidence used to support the claim. In other words, the evidence is completely irrelevant. For example, the houses in this neighborhood are all expensive, so they must be well built. Or, I got a ticket for speeding today because I did not have my oatmeal for breakfast. Or, the candidate would have been more convincing if he smiled more often. These fallacies are relatively easy to identify, as the arguments that contain them make absolutely no logical sense. The last fallacy we would like to show you is the slippery slope fallacy. This argument assumes without evidence that a given event is the first in a series of steps that will lead inevitably to some outcome. The slippery slope sounds like this. If I give you the day off, then I will have to give everyone the day off and there will be no one left to serve customers. Or, Jerry has already tried alcohol and pot. The next thing you know, he will be smoking crack, and then that will lead to a heroin addiction. Or, if we let people in from other countries, the whole country will be overrun by terrorists by 2020. When evaluating causal arguments, you need to determine if event A always leads to event B, which in turn always leads to event C. This connection would likely require quite a bit of evidence. So, let's review. Reasoning fallacies are errors in logic. While fallacies can sometimes be persuasive, intelligent listeners will demand that your persuasive speeches contain adequate evidence and sound reasoning. You can avoid reasoning fallacies by familiarizing yourself with the common types of fallacies. In this way, you can identify them when you hear them, and you can avoid them if the speech writing process. In this module, we reviewed 3 main groups of fallacies. In the first group of fallacies, the error lies in faulty reasoning. These fallacies include false analogy, hasty generalization, false dilemma, and false calls. The second group of fallacies appeals to the audience's prejudice and emotions instead of the dealing with the issue at hand. This group includes attacking the person, bandwagon, appeal to misplaced authority, and appeal to tradition. For the third group of fallacies, the error of the argument lies with irrelevant or inadequate evidence. In this group, we find begging the question, red herring, non sequitur, and slippery slope. Thank you for visiting the Public Speaking Project's virtual classroom. To learn more about critical thinking and reasoning, you can check out our free textbook, Public Speaking, the Virtual Text, at www.publicspeakingproject.org.